Welcome to the Anonymousaurus podcast. This is your host, Zero. Today we have Ashish Kebab. How are you doing today, Ashish?
Good.
Good. All right, today we're going to talk a little bit about animal rights and I guess, would that be associated with veganism as well?
Usually, yeah.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, so veganism is defined as a philosophy and way of living that seeks to exclude, as far as is practicable and possible, exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, entertainment, testing, or any other purpose. And animal rights, the animal rights movement really is about essentially giving all non-human sentient beings a certain set of fundamental rights, such as the right to freedom from cruelty and exploitation, the right to bodily autonomy, the right to live out their life as they see fit, or at the very least, the right to live out their life, period. And so those kind of supporting animal rights is a part of what veganism is.
Okay.
Veganism is a philosophy of the person, like what you do as an individual, whereas animal rights is like a ideology surrounding what rights animals should have. So they're closely linked.
Okay. So what's the difference between veganism and vegetarianism?
Well, vegetarian is a diet. It's exclusively just a diet, basically excluding, for the most part, lacto-ovo-vegetarians, which is the most cut products like milk and eggs.
Yogurt. No.
Yeah, dairy and eggs are fine. Honey's fine in vegetarianism. Whereas veganism is, since it's a philosophy, some people refer to a vegan diet, but at its core, it's really a philosophy. And it seeks to not consume anything that as a result of exploiting animals. So that would be pretty much all animal products: honey, dairy, eggs, leather, silk.
And this is all these things are exactly what you are.
Well, I am a vegan, so I don't consume any animal products. And when I say consume, I mean I don't go out and purchase animal products, because purchasing them creates the demand for those products to exist and creates the demand for the industries that do the exploitation.
So how do you, like, whenever you go out to purchase clothes, like what do you look for whenever you're purchasing clothes?
I mean, most clothes are vegan by default. Really, the only thing I have to avoid is silk or leather. Silk is not that common in the first place, so it's really leather. Just make sure I don't purchase anything that's leather. Anything that I have that's leather that I already owned before I went vegan, I haven't like thrown away or anything, because that doesn't really matter.
What about like polyester and wool and stuff like that?
I did forget to mention wool. Wool is from sheep, so I can't have that either. I don't think polyester is from animals.
Thought that polyester was a mixture of like wool and some other products, but I could be mistaken about that.
It's a synthetic man-made fiber material.
Okay.
So yeah, no, it's not made. Okay, it's not made from animal products. Yeah.
Okay. How long have you been a vegan?
I'd say about 2 years now. I was raised vegetarian, and that was mostly for religious purposes because of my parents. And there were brief phases where I actually ate meat as well, because my parents allowed us to, and we had this like phase since everyone around us was eating meat. But eventually switched back to vegetarianism, and then a couple years ago I took an ethical stance and went vegan.
Okay. And do you mind talking about that ethical stance?
Well, I mean, most of my life, I'd say I felt empathy towards animals. There was a period of time where I would because I couldn't say I'm vegetarian for religious reasons since I'm atheist. I've been atheist for a long time. So I would just say I'm vegetarian for ethical reasons, but that was contradictory because some of the products I was consuming, dairy and eggs, were not so ethical. So eventually, I just kind of, especially once I learned about the practices of the industries involved, I decided to switch to a vegan lifestyle. So
Okay. Okay. I'm assuming the animal rights thing is kind of what prompted you to just go all out veganism rather than vegetarian. Is that correct?
yeah, at some level, I didn't want to be a participant in the exploitation of animals.
Okay. And tell me about some of the exploitations that you've encountered with animals.
Well, I mean, the industry standard. Well, okay. Let me define it. So, exploitation is essentially the commodification status of animals. We're basically treating animals as a commodity to be bought and sold, to take stuff from them for human gain or human profit. Specifically, when we don't need to. That's the big key. Like because we're omnivorous, we have the capability to eat plants, we have the capability to eat animals.
Okay, interesting.
So we have the choice there. And as far as what the industry practices are, they're pretty bad, even from a welfare perspective. My argument is, even if the animals were treated really well, we're still taking their lives from them prematurely and needlessly. But the truth is, they're not treated well. Every animal within the agriculture industry is designed. The systems in place are designed for efficiency and profit, not for animal welfare or the concerns of animals. So what we're talking about is intensive farming.
Okay. So would you be for like a small farm?
Not really, because it's the fundamental right of the animal not to be exploited. So like even if you treated an animal really, really well for like a year and then you slaughtered it, you're still taking its life needlessly and before it's ready to die. The animal, basically, when you kill someone who doesn't want to die, I don't think that's a correct way of doing things.
Yeah, that's a fair way of looking at it. However, how I see it, because I actually think that a lot of what you just said prior to this was actually really good. And it actually opened my eyes a lot just within that brief period of time. However, I think some of the small farms are fine. Because a lot of times I've noticed that some of the small time farms, they treat their animals for the most part really well. They mostly do free range. They have a lot of space. They usually they feed them really good and almost too good in some cases. Sometimes I almost say they're overfeeding them, but they. And there's some farmers that don't do it so great. They treat them like crap. They don't give them enough room. They don't seem to give it good shelter. But for the most part, whenever you think about it, like a cow is not going to exist in the wild. Like those things will be taken down so quickly and so easily. And there's actually a saying about that. Don't be a cow, be a bull. Because during a storm, so like basically a cow runs away from the storm where a bull charges the storm, so it's a lot shorter for the bull, whereas the cow is constantly trying to outrun the storm, which it can never do. Eventually that storm catches up and then it's in there for longer because it's still trying to run out of it. But that's besides the point. I just couldn't see something like an animal like that, or maybe even a chicken, just living in the wild because they're so far bred to like what they are now. Do you have any input on that?
Well, you're correct that we have selectively bred these animals to be a specific way over many years. And the end result of everyone switching to a vegan lifestyle would be that these animals wouldn't exist. They would go extinct. Which is fine with us because they were not here originally in the first place. We kind of made them into existence, and they don't live very good lives because they have a lot of genetic issues. Like chickens, broiler chickens, grow so fat that they, like a lot of them will just die trapped on their backs because they can't walk, they can't get up, their bones will break, they're just too heavy.
That's crazy.
Cows produce so much milk that like just way more milk than they would in the wild. Egg laying hens produce 300 eggs per year, whereas in the wild the jungle fowl would only produce like 12 eggs. That's what it's evolved from. So they would go extinct. And as far as treating them well, imagine that you take all these farm animals and you just replace them with dogs and cats. So as well as you might treat them, I would say most people would probably not be okay with it if they were dogs and cats that we were, giving plenty of space for a year and then we send them to a slaughterhouse to cut their throat open.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that, and it's not like we're saying that animals should have the same rights as humans, but we're saying that farm animals and all other animals should have the same rights as we currently give dogs and cats. Which we treat them as companions, we care for them. There are abuse laws protecting them from abuse, whereas there aren't really so many laws protecting farm animals. So that's the main thing. And then as far as well as the farm might treat their animals, there's still some level of exploitation. There has to be. Like for dairy, you have to impregnate the cow in order for it to start producing milk. And that is almost always through artificial insemination. The dairy cows will end up producing way more milk than they normally would. The calves have to be taken from their mothers or they'll drink their mother's milk. The cows end up getting lots of infections because of the way that they're milked. And if the farm is like not following industry standard practices, they're probably not making a profit because they're going to be outcompeted by the bigger farms that use milk machines and standard practices.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and small business versus big business is definitely another topic for another time, but that would definitely be something to hit on. As far as a lot of what you said there is really it shouldn't be, but it is kind of enlightening. I still think though there's a lot of farmers out there that take care of their stock, their livestock really well. I don't know if that's a cringy word to you or not, but I just said it because that's what came to my mind. I think that it's really, especially for somebody like me, because I have ulcerative colitis, a lot of fibers really irritate my digestive tract. So it's a lot harder for me to eat like vegetables than it is for some types of meat. Typically, I stick with yogurt. That's my like where I typically go. That and granola and stuff like that. Those things I can eat, but some of the things, most vegetables, since almost all of them have fibers. I try to eat a lot of fruit, but they have a lot of fiber in them as well. It seems like I can only typically go the route of like some type of animal product. So what do you think about something like that?
I mean, if you have a illness that makes it hard to eat certain foods, then I think a dietitian or a nutritionist would be helpful. But there have been studies that have shown that simply consuming meat increases your risk for developing ulcerative colitis.
Interesting.
I actually have it here because it's part of this paper that I wrote at one point. I'm not a nutritionist, so I don't know the specifics of that specific illness. Inflammatory bowel diseases are not something that I looked very far into. But I would say most people can definitely switch to a plant-based diet without any adverse effects. There might be a few people that need like special planning around it, and maybe it is the case that some percentage of people, probably very small, may need some sort of animal product. And we are getting pretty close to having like lab-grown meat be commercial. We already have lab-grown meat that's FDA approved. I know people don't like the term lab-grown, but it's the same. It's the same product. that's found in animals, it's literally animal protein. It's just that it's cultured, um, rather than grown from a living sentient being. So you don't have all the suffering and exploitation involved with it.
I would definitely like to look more into those lab grown meats. I know they sell them in some places. They're still really expensive and not easy to come by these days. Well, these days, actually, it's a lot easier than it was before, but like not yet. It's still not at that what do you call it? That capacity.
I mean, and
Not much
there's
to see.
also plant-based meats and other low FODMAP plant-based foods. So I don't think it would be impossible to follow a plant-based diet, even if you have certain illnesses that make it harder to eat specific types of foods. Not all. I mean, a lot of plants are definitely high in fiber, and most people don't get enough fiber, honestly. But
Mhm.
if you have trouble with fiber, there's definitely other ways around it.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to figure out if there's any way could they extract the fiber from the plant, or does that pretty much eliminate the whole thing?
Well, I mean, there's processed foods like the plant-based meats that I mentioned. A lot of times they are lower in fiber because they're meant to mimic actual meat. They're just made out of plants.
Interesting.
I haven't looked too far into low fiber foods because it's not really been an issue for me, but it's definitely doable. You like a plant-based diet can be really healthy. It can also be really unhealthy. I mean, there's plenty of plant-based junk food out there. I mean, potato chips are vegan.
Oh, touche. I did not think about that. Yeah. Man, that's a good point there.
Potato chips, French fries. We have a lot of stuff like that. That people eat a lot of.
Except the only reason why vegans stay away from it is because of the oils that they put on it, right? The grease.
I wouldn't say
and the
vegans
lard.
stay away from it. So veganism is not like a monolithic group. There's a lot of different. Like some people who are vegan also follow a healthy diet, but some people might just eat vegan junk food all day. As long as they're just not consuming animal products, it's still vegan. So
That's really interesting.
so you can eat like Beyond Burgers, Impossible Burgers, which are similar in macronutrient profile to beef.
So
Which
that's how you get. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to say this before I forget. So that must be how you get like fatter vegans, is because they're sitting around eating potato chips.
well, yeah. I mean, there's also it's not just that. I mean, sugar is vegan for the most part. So
yeah,
you can get
that's
plenty
one
of
of the biggest contributors.
plenty of calories. I mean, you can drink a lot of soda. That's
True.
pretty much all vegan. So it's like most food is vegan. I mean, plants provide something like 80% of all calories.
Wow.
It's
I
like
didn't know that.
yeah,
I
it's
should have read your paper.
most calories are provided by plants, even though most of land use is from animal agriculture, and that's just because of the conversion inefficiency between plant to animal. The animals have to eat a lot of plants, and then they only give a small fraction of that in calories. So most calories, especially globally, the U.S. is a little less so, but especially globally, most calories are from plants. And as far as sugar goes, I mean, now only in the U.S. I don't know why this is only in the U.S., but in the U.S., processed refined sugar is actually not vegan technically. I don't think a lot of vegans pay attention to it or care too much, but we use bone char in the U.S. to make the sugar white. I don't really know why.
Really? Wait, what color is sugar naturally? Like,
It's mostly brownish.
Brownish?
So sugar is usually extracted from cane.
Mhm.
And if you've ever bought raw cane sugar, it's kind of yellowish brown.
Okay.
And if you ever get jaggery, which is like even closer to the sugar cane, that's very much just a brown powder. It tastes kind of fruity as well. And then white sugar is just the molasses have been removed from it. And in most countries, that's it. But in the US, they use bone char to like basically bleach it white.
It's crazy.
And then brown sugar is actually white sugar with the molasses added back to it, which is
No way. So they turn it white, and then they go, because I knew about the molasses thing, and that's why I was a little bit confused there for a minute. But wow,
Yeah,
that's
if you so that's why if you really want like sugar that's closer to the unrefined, you can just get unrefined cane sugar. You could use jaggery, but you usually only find that in like Indian stores and stuff. It's more only of an Indian thing. That's very unrefined, and it's not neutral in flavor like sugar is. So I wouldn't use it for most things. But um, barring that, you can just get raw cane sugar.
how would you propose that we could change the current day environment?
There's a few things. The problem with advocating for consumer change is people don't like changing their habits. People are especially resistant to veganism, mainly because when people go vegan, they're basically admitting that they were doing something wrong for a long period of time. So
Mhm.
cognitive resistance to it. There's a phenomenon called cognitive dissonance,
Yep.
where essentially when your values don't match your actions, you tend to do things like rationalize. It's harder to convince people to go vegan, even though most people, like if they were raised vegan, they would definitely have been vegan. But because we've been conditioned so hard into it, it's like a similar thing with religious people. When you've been Christian for 30 years, it's really hard to convince someone who's been Christian for that long to like abandon their religion because they've been conditioned into that for so long, and it's like part of their identity at that point.
Yeah, that's why they usually change at a younger age before, they once they change at a younger age, then it's a lot easier to accept. But then when they get older, that's more time that you've been, whatever, that goes for anything it seems. But yeah, religion kind of like that's one of the biggest hard hitters there because it's just like it's pounded into your head like the beginning of your life. And so if you don't make that change before a certain age, you might end up always being religious.
And the other thing behind it, both with veganism and atheism, is that there are so many other Christians, there's so many other omnivores, social pressure. If
Yep.
whenever someone deviates from the norm, you're kind of ostracized, regardless of what it is. So vegans will find it a lot harder in social groups because like if you have a friend group, you're gonna have a much harder time figuring out where to go out to eat or whatever. A lot of times people just tend to not like vegans. So there's a social factor that makes it hard. And then of course the identity issue that I mentioned. But one thing I think that is really helpful, most major social change throughout history has usually come from governmental entities like forcing things. So I would say in general, we slowly would have regulations over time that would cater towards plant-based diets. Right now, the animal agriculture industry receives massive government subsidies, which is why a burger is a couple dollars and not like $30 because farmers receive huge subsidies.
Interesting.
Especially the dairy industry of all industries, they actually receive more subsidies for producing more milk. So they're basically incentivized to produce more milk than they can actually sell. And it's pretty common in the dairy industry to produce so much milk that they just end up dumping a bunch of it. Like they just waste it. They just pour it down the drain because they're producing more than they can actually sell because the government is essentially rewarding them for doing it.
So, what would you propose? Like, whenever we go through these shortages of it's for babies, formula. Whenever somebody isn't breastfeeding, and then so they have to use formula, but in shortages like that, they have to revert to things like cow's milk or goat's milk or etc. How do you propose if something like that happens? What would you say an alternative be? or would you say that maybe we be producing more of those formulas?
Well, one thing to note is that about 75 to 83% of all agricultural land is for animal agriculture. So, and about half of all usable land in the world is agriculture. So we have like 4/5 of that being just for animal agriculture. So a study has shown that by switching to a plant-based diet, we can reduce our land footprint by 75%. And we already produce enough food to feed the entire world. Even though 1 out of 10 people go, we have enough food to feed over 10 billion people. It's just that we are feeding most of this food to animals. So if we all switch to a plant-based diet, I mean, we will have so much more land and so many more resources, and we'll use so many less resources in the process of agriculture that I think shortages will be a lot less of an issue.
Okay.
Just because right now most of the plants that we grow, we are feeding to animals and not people.
Okay. Now, keep in mind that a lot of the stuff that we feed, like cows, horses, and things like that, is typically grass. So, like grass and hay, stuff like that. Even though it's not, hay isn't nutritional at all. I think it's mostly meant for bedding, but I'm pretty sure they eat it too.
Well, so some of it, you're partially correct. There are not, the thing is, not all cattle are fed grass. A lot of them, and many of them are fed both grass and animal feed. But hay is a harvested product. But the thing is, and you could also argue, some of the animal feed is not human consumable. That's also correct. But as a whole, 90% of the soy that we grow is for animals.
You're saying just basically switch whatever we're pretty much ground up oats of some sort, and like what I think they do. A lot of people around here, they feed like ground up oats and corn and stuff like that. But if we probably switch to a lot of that and other things like that, put in place of wherever that the livestock was, and just put plants there, that's a good solution, right? That would be enough.
I mean, so here's the thing: not all pasture land is arable, so we can't all grow crops on all of it. But we certainly have a lot of land that we are essentially wasting on animal agriculture because we are grazing cattle, or housing cattle, or we are growing animal feed. I mean, we're just a lot of the land area. Animal agriculture is the number one cause of deforestation because we have to tear down forests to grow feed to feed the animals with. Essentially, I mean, more than half of global deforestation, is just from cattle farming. So
because they're getting rid of the forests to make these big farms for livestock.
Yeah, and especially cattle, but because cattle, not only do cattle need to eat a lot of feed, but if you don't give them feed, then you have to make a massive area for them to graze. Grass-fed is not even possible. Like, if we can't switch to entirely grass-fed because we don't have enough land on the planet to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. So the main thing is, switching to a plant-based diet, we will significantly reduce our resource use, including our water usage. Water usage is huge in animal agriculture. So like I have a chart here. Land use of foods per 1,000 calories. Beef takes about 120 square meters to produce 1,000 calories, whereas the highest plant on here is tomatoes, which takes about 4 square meters. And that's the highest consuming land area plant. Like every single plant here is lower than every single animal. The most space efficient animal product is fish, which is about 4.7 square meters. So we're using so many of our resources on farming that we can easily just use on farming plants and feeding the world. And like I said, we can already feed more than 10 billion people with the plants we grow. It's just that we're not feeding people, we're feeding animals. Actually, it's pretty much we're using third world countries for this because we're growing a lot of our animal feed in third world countries and then importing it to to like the US and the UK to feed animals there, so people can eat meat here. And the people in those actual countries, like in Brazil, where the Amazon rainforest is torn down, they're not really seeing the benefit. They're just getting the rainforest torn down.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, man. This I was pretty convinced pretty early on in the podcast that your stance is actually really good and you have a lot of good information. It didn't take much for me to kind of push me towards the direction that I'm actually thinking about now, because you gave me a lot to think about in just a short amount of time. Usually these things can last a while. And I definitely want to get you back on and try to get some more people on here that have a stronger viewpoint than I do, because I'm pretty honest. Before the podcast, I would say I was moderate right. I guess you could say right. Now you kind of swayed me to moderate left, but it's teetering. It's on that teetering point, so there's the possibility somebody could push me back over to the right. But yeah, for sure, man. That's actually a lot of good stuff. I'm gonna definitely do a lot more research. I'm gonna read the paper then, for sure.
So when you say like left or right, I mean
that was
ideally this shouldn't be like
a left wing
political in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah. The only reason why I kind of say it that way is typically how this specific thing kind of sways. I only say it like that because I didn't know how to say it really realistically.
I would say veganism is associated with, the more liberal leaning mindset, but there are definitely conservative vegans. It's just like atheism. There are probably more liberal atheists, but there are also conservative atheists. Because they're not technically supposed to be related.
Yes, I agree. No politics really should be related to any kind of spectrum. It's just we do that just because it gives you a good idea of what that person believes, and that's kind of the sad part about putting the labels on it, because it's like you can be far right, but then all of a sudden believe on some topics. All of a sudden you're like way on the left, and it's just like how is that correlated? But it's like, yeah. So that's why I kind of don't like labels, but I use them to define myself, just so people get it. It's like almost like an all or nothing. Like I put it out there. If you don't like that, good. Because like if you don't like that or like that, good. You figured out most of what I am.
And one thing to note, that paper that I sent you, that is mostly about health, not about the things that we necessarily talked about.
Yeah, somebody was telling me about that.
It's a health-focused paper. I mean, it does tend to show that, animal products are correlated with a lot of negative health outcomes. But that's really a different topic. The reason I wrote that is I'd say more people care about their own health than they do about the environment or, animal rights and stuff like that. And there have been a lot of studies out there. I didn't do any of my own studies. I just cited other studies in here and just kind of did a systematic review of those results. You can. I mean, if you want to read the paper, feel free.
Okay. Yeah.
It's not meant to be super. It's not formatted in the same way you would find an actual scientific paper that's published in a journal. It's not up to that standard. So feel free to take it with at least a small grain of salt, and do your own analysis of it. But I do cite pretty much everything that I claim in there.
That's good. All right. Well, I guess that concludes the podcast. Thank you very much for listening to Anonymousaurus. Thank you for coming, Ashish. Is it Ashish or Ashish?
Well,
Ashish?
Ashish is how everyone pronounces it. Ashish is the Indian way of saying it, and technically correct, but nobody actually calls me that.
All right. Well, at least we got it at the end, and I'm probably going to continue to mispronounce it. All right, man. Well, thank you very much for showing up. And we'll next time we will get the people, and I will have it, and then I will let you know. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you very much.
See ya.
Yep. Peace.